We're going to look at what is called the chancery hand, because it's what I call the beginning of a change not only in writing, but also in type as well. I've mentioned San Vito of Padua as one of the outstanding writers, professional writers of the late 15th century, and shown this example of his work, which you can see in slightly more detail here. It's a cursive hand, and in this case written probably for a client who wanted a rather elegant piece of handwriting for a book to read. And a reminder that San Vito was very expert in making pen-drawn capital letters. So here are great models for the Paduan form of the humanistic cursive and the capital letters to go with them. But as for chancery, we'd better get that word straight. A chancery was simply an administrative centre, an official one. So in Rome, right in the middle of central Rome, is a chancery palace. It is I think you have to call it the document production building of the Vatican, where scribes would turn out the official documents of the Catholic Church. It still belongs to the Vatican, by the way. It's not part of the Vatican City, but it is Vatican property. And there it is, right down near the Campo dei Fiori in Rome, probably by Bramante, the architect. But the great financial centre of Italy in many ways is, of course, Venice. And here we've got a document which is a professional writing master applying for the post of the official writer to the government, the chancery of Venice. And he offers to teach chancery writing, the cursive we're looking at here, but also all sorts of other writing, antiqua, which is what we would think of as Roman, but also chancery, cancellaresca, mercantesca. And there you can choose between modern or bastarda. Mercantesca, by the way, is commercial writing, and we'll have a look at that. Moderna simply means the way it's done now, or Gothic. And the bastarda we've already looked at. Tagliente also produced a printed handbook, and this is his handbook of 1524. It's printed from a woodblock, or a series of woodblocks. He would write the model on thin paper, and it would be turned upside down and probably oiled and stuck onto a piece of wood. And the wood engraver would simply clear away the pieces that went to print, leaving the exact model of the calligraphy. The one downside of this, by the way, you see at the bottom, if this is 1524, and this is the 1531 reprint, someone's had to cut out the 4 and put in the XI at the end here for 1531. Well, here is Tagliente writing the regular chancery hand, le lettere cancellaresche. He would also do a variation if you wanted it, as he says. If you have a a particularly important client. Maybe the client would be amused to see a certain bold stroke. Qualche gagliardo tratto. Well, here they are. You can dress it up with these bold strokes. Well, let's move from Tagliente, who was well established in Venice, to Rome. And this is the handbook of someone who was employed in Rome, probably in the building we've just looked at, Ludovico degli Arrighi. Arrighi is his family name. He's often known just as Vicentino, and all that means is that that's where he came from, Vicenza, just as Leonardo came from Vinci. So here's the beginning of his writing book in 1522. I've been begged or forced by my friends to show a wider public what my writing is like. So here is Vicentino's writing, again cut on wood. There's his title page, beautifully laid out with this rather compressed cursive form, which, as he said, is the way this writing is done. It is a kind of compressed writing, as he shows here. One of his specialities, clearly, was how to do capital letters. You can do them plain, as you see at the bottom, but if you go up top, you can see some variation. And there's another block showing these variations on capital letters, some of which were to get into italic printing type too. And here's one of the wood blocks that illustrate his second writing book, Il modo di temperare le penne. Penne, by the way, means pens, but it means feathers too in Italian. And that's what a pen is, a feather. We saw that Tagliente offered to do a mercantile or a financial hand. Well, this is what it looked at. And of course, we go right back to Gothic. Merchants were not going to have the sort of new writing that was used by intellectuals and literary people. So here is the financial hand. Pagarete per questa prima di cambio a uso ducati 40 d'oro, and so on. So it's a document. The other trade that wasn't going to have newfangled writing was that of the legal people. This is a kind of writing for notaries or lawyers. And again, as you see, it is very much a Gothic form of hand. We're turning now to the shift in writing. In 1540, a certain Palatino, Giovanni Battista Palatino, produced his writing book, which, as you can see, is a rather rigid form of the chancery hand. And in fact, if you look at his own writing, that's a piece that he actually wrote with his pen. It is extraordinarily rigid, brilliantly done, but not exactly relaxed. And my point here is that there's a new kid on the block. If you look at the work of someone else who is coming up. First of all, what is going on in Palladino's writing. A kind of parallel that always occurs to me, I don't know if I'm right, is that the parallel is the style in art of mannerism. That is a rather tense oddity about the work of certain painters, but it's also true in architecture. And the example that was picked out in a brilliant essay by Nicholas Pevsner was this building in Mantua, which looks like a Renaissance courtyard, all very harmonious and classical, until you start looking at detail. Something very odd is going on. The parts of these pediments don't meet. Even more weird, in between certain parts of this horizontal line of stone, a keystone has slipped. Very unsettling. And one has to remember, if we're in the later part of the early 16th century, a whole lot of things are going wrong. The Turks are making moves on Constantinople, which they get. And there are all kinds of other things going on. Martin Luther and his Protestants seem to have got quite a lot of the territory of the Catholic Church. So an unsettled time. And maybe this obsessively rigid handwriting reflects a bit of the mood of the time. But not all of it, because, as I said, a new kid on the block is coming up. And this is the big change. Giovan Francesco Cresci was professionally a writer for the Vatican. He came from Milan, which is where he was born. But here's his writing, and it's new. What's been with a broad pen is now on a much more flexible, finer one. The rigidity of the writing of the chancery hand is giving way to something much more flowing. This is a real change, because what we see on the right is the new style. Talking about Roman capitals of the Renaissance, I showed this weird, obsessively detailed construction, making a Roman capital with geometry. And that's the work of Palladino. Cresci says that's nonsense. Don't use the compass. Just use your judgment and follow your eye. And that's what he did. His first writing book here is 1560, the Esemplare di più sotti lettere. And as you see, the forms of the capitals are freely flowing, beautifully handled. Very little rigidity here. And here is his writing engraved on wood, and it becomes the new style in calligraphy. One little detail, calligraphy is needed to carry a letter to an important person, so long as you know how to address the important person. And these abbreviations are how to do it. In the second line, eccellentissimo, most excellent, and so on. And Cresci could do it. Here's a letter to his own patron, the Cardinal Sirleto, al illustrissimo et reverendissimo Monsignore, to the most illustrious and the most reverend Monsignore, which you title you use in addressing a cardinal. Remember that a letter had the recipient written on the outside of the piece of paper, no wrapping it up in envelopes. And according to what it looks like, presumably the cardinal secretary will choose the ones that are worth opening and reading. Gresce is, I find, a fascinating character, and I've already written about particularly his influence on stone-cut lettering, but here is one of the last of his examples of writing. Freer, even more fantastic, I think, in some ways, than the early example I showed you. Very beautiful. Which makes it a shock, of course, to turn to a bit of his everyday jotting. Here's the manuscript for a book he was writing when he died. It was published after his death. And he's trying to set out his whole life, his philosophy, if you like. And one of his chapters is headed, "Where did the best writing masters of Italy learn how to do writing?" Well, he tells you. They're all my students, quite a lot. And he names them. Mercato, Orfei, Corione, Giacomo Romano. So this is the later generation of writing masters who would teach handwriting. It's a big shift. Orfei I've already dealt with under the heading of Renaissance inscriptions. Here he is in the St. Peter's Square in front of St. Peter's, putting Roman letters onto this pagan obelisk, using the designs of Gresce, of course. And he did a book of his own inscriptions in 1590, and showing the capital letters, but this is one of the captions to one of the inscriptions. And here is the new style. These blobs at the top of certain letters made a style which became known as testeggiata, with heads on the letters. And you do it by taking the thin pen round in a loop and letting the round form fill in. That's going to have a big effect on printing type, sooner or later. Here's another of the pupils, Corione. Again, just slightly more formal, but very beautifully handled. Both this and the Orfei book are using a different medium for reproducing their writing. It's copperplate, using a sheet of copper and a thin burin that can produce the thicks and thins of the pen. And this will lead eventually to a quite different form of writing, and we'll come to that. But it has another effect too. Gresce's Roman letter, which you see here from his writing book of 1570, has a very curious way of handling thicks and thins. You can see at the top there, at the left, the blob, the testa, and the smooth curve of the bowl of the A, not that far from much, much later Roman letters. Like, for example, the much later work of one Bodoni. And there is the great blob again, filled in, which becomes a feature of printing type. So there you are. I've identified Gresci as certainly a very, very major figure in this shift of the way writing is done. Did it make him cheerful? Well, not really. This is the only portrait we've got of him. We'd better turn to what people thought of him. Couple of examples, quite late ones. Servadori, who seems here to be writing in Spanish, but he was in fact Italian, so one guesses that this is a translation. But here he says, Gresci was the first to deserve the name of true penman, as the inventor of this rounded style of writing the chancery hand. That's what he says. And someone genuinely writing in Spanish now, Torrio de la Riva y Herrero, saying that there's another writing master who helped to give the cancelleresca this roundness and tenderness, the rotundità interesa. But it was Gresci, really, following Aldous, he says, but also Amphiario. Gresci corrected the angularity, the aridity, angulosidad y aridez of the writing of Palatino and even Vicentino and Tagliente. Well, there you are. It's quite a judgment, and it's one that I certainly follow.